Hey, my sax playing friend Alexander from Saxophone Masterclass here. Really excited about today's lesson because I'm going to be showing you all the different ways you can practice your scales from beginner to advanced. Now I'm going to start off by showing you the simplest way to practice your scales on the saxophone, and then I'm going to show you the way I practice my scales on the saxophone, which is a little more advanced. And I don't expect everyone to be able to play their scales like this, but I just wanted you to see how professional sax players practice their scales so you can have a little more insight as to how you can advance on the saxophone, how you can push yourself when it comes to learning new scales. So I'm going to use a couple of different scales to show you what I mean. I'm going to be using G major and I'm going to be using C major, and I actually have a couple of videos that take you through those scales step by step, and I'll link to them at the end of this lesson as well as in the description of this video. But you can also get my saxophone scales cheat sheet for free at saxophonemasterclass.com/scales. Inside that saxophone scales cheat sheet, I'm going to give you all the different letter names for the major scales, the minor scales, the blues scales, the pentatonic scales, totally free with the sheet music, as well as a complete fingering guide of every note on the saxophone, written out as flats and written out as sharps. So it's completely free, no strings attached. You can get it at saxophonemasterclass.com/scales. So the first way you want to practice your scales on the saxophone is by simply playing in one octave, ascending and descending. So this is how I teach saxophone scales when I'm showing beginners new scales on the sax. I start on the root note of the scale, for example G, and then I play up the scale to the G an octave above. So let me show you what I mean. So G major in one octave sounds like this. So that's a perfect scale to start on as a beginner as well, because this is the middle range of the saxophone, which is a good place to start. Because as you get lower on the sax below that G, it starts to get a little harder to get the notes out. The same thing goes for the high notes above the high G with the octave key. It starts to get harder and harder as you go up high on the saxophone. So again, this is a great place to start if you're a beginner, and this is a great way to approach learning any scale on the saxophone, whether you're learning major scales, minor scales, blues scales, pentatonic scales. Taking that scale and playing it within one octave like this is a great place to start. It's a great place to understand what the notes are, what the letter names are, and that's going to help you with practicing your scales in the other ways I'm going to be showing you in this video. But now we want to start working on G major in those higher notes on the saxophone. Well, a great place to start is to actually go a fifth above the octave. So let's say we're on G with the octave key. A fifth above that is going to be G, A, B, C, D. That's a fifth. So the D with the palm key is going to be a fifth above the G with the octave key. Let me show you what I mean. So we made our way all the way up to G with the octave key. Now we're going to go a fifth above that G with the octave key. We're going to go from G, which is 1, A, 2, B, which is 3, C, which is 4, and then finally D, which is this key here that you press with your palm key right here. So these are the notes we're adding on with that G major in one octave. We keep going up to the fifth above the scale, right up to that high D with the palm key. So let me show you how I would practice it in its entirety. So that's the second way I would start practicing my scales. I would play one octave and then I would go another fifth above that and then go all the way back down to where I started. So let me show you another example of that starting on C major, and I'm going to start on the low C of the saxophone. So C major starting on low C is with that bottom key here. All the fingers down the left, all the fingers down the right, and this low key that presses down this pad here. So that's one octave on C major, and now we're going to go a fifth above that. So we're going to go C, which is 1, D with the octave key, that's 2, E with the octave key, that's 3, F with the octave key, that's 4, and G with the octave key. And that G with the octave key is now a fifth above the C. So this is C major in one octave and a fifth. So that's two examples of playing a scale with an octave and a fifth, and this should be the next step in your journey as you're learning your scales on the saxophone. So the third way to practice your scales is to practice them in 2 octaves. We did an octave by itself, we've done an octave and a fifth, and now we're going to do 2 octaves. So with C major, you can start on the low C, go up to that middle C, that's 1 octave, go up to that G, that's an octave on the fifth, a G with an octave key, and then we keep going up to the C with an octave key to play 2 octaves. And if you want to learn C major in 2 octaves step by step, I actually have an entire video dedicated to that, and I'll link to it at the end of this lesson and also in the description of this video. So let me just show you what C major in 2 octaves sounds like now. So that's C major in 2 octaves, and if you can play any of your other scales in 2 octaves, this is how you should practice them. Play them evenly, play them in time, play them preferably to a metronome if you can. Try to take a breath in between, perhaps once every octave, so you can take a breath at the middle C, then take a breath when you get to the high C, and then when you get back down to the middle C again, take another breath until finally you get to the low C. And now we're getting into a more advanced way to practice our scales. So you can play a lot of different scales in 2 octaves. As long as they're starting on that low F or below, you can do a scale in 2 octaves. So let me show you what I mean. Any note below F on most saxophones, you're going to be able to do 2 octaves. So F major would sound like this. And you can also play scales in 2 octaves on any of those lower notes below the F fingering. If you have a high F sharp fingering on the sax, you can also play scales in 2 octaves starting on the low F sharp as well. Now of course, if you're more advanced and you know how to play all the altissimo fingerings on saxophone, you can actually play 2 octaves on almost any scale as long as you're able to hit those notes in the altissimo register of the saxophone. Again, I have more lessons on my YouTube channel on how to play D major in 2 octaves as well as how to play C major in 2 octaves, so go and check those out after you've watched this video. So now that we've learned scales in 2 octaves, we can actually go a step further than this, and what I'm going to show you is how to start playing scales across the whole range of the saxophone. So the fourth way to practice scales is to start going as high as you can on the saxophone, no matter what scale you're playing. So I'm going to show you C major starting on the low C, going all the way up to the high C with the octave key, that's 2 octaves, and then I'm going to keep going until I play the highest note I can play within the key of C major, and that's going to be the high F palm key fingering, and then I'm going to go all the way back down to the low C. So this is a more advanced way to start practicing your scales, and it's going to help you with improving your palm key fingerings as well. So we're starting on the low C down here, and we're going to go all the way up to the high C with the octave key, and then keep going into the palm key fingerings here all the way up to F. And that's the fourth way to practice your scales. Start on the root note and go as high as you can within that scale, and then go all the way back down to the root note. So I didn't play any notes outside of C major. I played all the notes of C major, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, but I just kept going until I got to the highest note I could play, which was F. Now, of course, if you can play higher than this and get into the altissimo range of the saxophone, you should also practice your scales like that too. So the fifth way of practicing your scales is to actually go up to the highest note you can play using that scale, and then go down to the lowest note you can play using that scale. So with C major, we went all the way up to F with the palm key fingering, then we went all the way down to C. Well, we can go one note lower than that to the low B, and then go back up to C. So this is the perfect way to get the whole range of the instrument using the scale that you're practicing, which is really important for improving your technique on the sax. So let me show you how it sounds. So as you can hear, I started on that low C, went all the way up to the C with the octave key, then kept going D, E, and F to get those high fingerings up to F, then went back down to C and all the way down to the low C, then finally I went down to low B, which is here, and back up to C. So this is playing the full range of the saxophone, and you can do this on any scale. So I'm going to show you again on G major, going all the way up to the high F sharp, going back down to G, then going lower to the low B again, then back up to G where I started. Let me show you. So I started on that G fingering, went all the way up to the G with the octave key, then we went to D, which is the fifth with the octave key, then we kept going up to E, and then F sharp. I have an F sharp fingering here, then back down to D, all the way to G with the octave key, all the way down to G, and then kept going F sharp, E, D, C, low B, right down to the lowest note I can play using G major, and then back up C, D, E, F sharp, G. So that is the fifth and final way to practice your scales on the saxophone. Use the full range of the sax no matter what note you're starting on. Go up to the highest note you can play, and then go down to the lowest note you can play. And then finally go back to where you started. So that's a really advanced technique. That's how I practice my scales in saxophone. In fact, I take it a step further and I practice all my altissimo notes. So I go past the range that I showed you and go all the way up to the highest notes I can play, and then go back down again. So let me show you what I mean, starting on the low C, going all the way up to the high D, that's an octave above the D palm key, then going all the way down to the low B, then finally landing on C. So again, that was me starting on low C, going all the way up to the second octave C with the octave key, all the way to the high F palm key, and then kept going into the altissimo range, G, A, B, C, and D, all the way up to that high D, an octave above the palm key, and then all the way back down, going down to the lowest note, B on the sax, and then going back up to the low C. So that is how pros practice their scales on the saxophone. But remember, you need to be working to a metronome. You need to practice tonguing every note if you're a beginner. If you're a little more advanced, try not tonguing any of the notes, slurring into every single note. That's really going to help with your technique and your rhythm. And you want to make sure you're taking your time at first, starting at 60 beats per minute, and then working in increments so you can play up to speed in time with good rhythm. So that's today's lesson. I hope you enjoyed it. I know that was a lot to throw at you, but if you want to start learning your scales in saxophone, you can check out the rest of the videos on my channel. I've got step-by-step tutorials, and I've also got the fingering charts for a lot of scales that you can get for free. But if you want to start learning all your scales on the saxophone, I recommend getting my saxophone scales cheat sheets absolutely free. Just go to saxophonemasterclass.com/scales and you can get the letter names, you can get the sheet music for all the different scales in Western music. Major scales, harmonic minor scales, melodic minor scales, natural minor scales, blues scales, pentatonic scales, minor pentatonic scales. They're all inside this cheat sheet, absolutely free, and I give you a fingering guide of every single note on the saxophone as well. So you get all the charts, all the fingerings for every note in both octaves of the sax. I really hope you enjoyed today's lesson. If you're not a subscriber, click that subscribe button, like this video, comment below if there's any other suggestions for lessons you want me to do on this channel. And remember, I put out lessons every single week. So until next time, enjoy playing your scales and happy playing.